Imagine finding $1 billion in gold, just sitting at the bottom of the ocean.
Right. The ultimate dream.
Exactly. I mean, you solve this century-old mystery. You build all this groundbreaking technology to reach it, and you actually manage to bring that unimaginable wealth back up to the surface.
Which is a miracle in itself.
It is, and you'd think that is the ultimate victory condition, right? Like, game over, you won. But what if pulling up that treasure was actually the absolute worst thing that could have ever happened to you?
Yeah, it completely shatters that whole fairy tale illusion we all have about sunken treasure.
Totally. What if unlocking the greatest lost treasure in U.S. history only guaranteed that you would eventually become like a paranoid fugitive hiding in a $200 a night hotel room with literal stacks of cash?
I mean, you open the chest, the gold glitters, but instead of happily ever after, you get this decades-long nightmare of paranoia, betrayal, and federal manhunts.
It's wild. Well, welcome to another deep dive. Today, we are taking you into a story that spans over a century and a half, and honestly, our stack of sources for this one is just incredible.
Oh, absolutely. The range of material we have is huge.
Yeah, we're looking at historical records of the 1857 sinking of the SS Central America. We've got maritime salvage reports from Odyssey Marine Exploration, book reviews of Gary Kinder's 1998 bestseller Ship of Gold in the Deep Blue Sea.
Which is a classic, by the way.
Right, but we also have a heavily detailed insider critique by former chief scientist Bob Evans, which kind of turns that book on its head. And bringing it right up to the present day, we are looking at breaking March 2026 news articles detailing a fugitive treasure hunter's release from a decade in prison.
It is a massive narrative arc. I mean, we are basically connecting the wild optimism of the California gold rush to the evolution of deep-sea robotics and then ultimately to the very darkest, most secretive corners of human nature.
So our mission for this deep dive is to figure out how an absolute triumph of science and engineering was completely overshadowed by human greed and just this endless legal nightmare.
Yeah.
And to do that, we really have to start with the stakes. We have to go back to September 1857 to a ship called the SS Central America.
Right. So the Central America was this 280-foot sidewheel steamer. She was actually originally named the George Law, and her whole job was to run a regular, vital route bringing passengers and cargo from Panama up the eastern seaboard to New York.
And the passenger list on this specific voyage is really what makes this story so legendary. You have 578 passengers and crew, and the vast majority of them are men returning from the California gold rush.
Right. These are the guys who actually made it.
Exactly. These are people who went west, actually struck it rich, and were finally bringing their fortunes home. I mean, the historical sources estimate the ship was carrying somewhere between 10 to 21 tons of gold.
Just think about the physical weight of that for a second. Tons of gold.
It's unbelievable.
And much of it was a massive commercial shipment destined to prop up struggling New York banks. But the passengers themselves were essentially walking vaults.
Oh, right.
Yeah, they were carrying gold dust in pouches, raw nuggets, freshly minted coins in their pockets, and carpet bags.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to really understand the impact of this ship going down, we have to look at the mechanics of the 1857 economy. Like, under the gold standard, physical gold literally was the money supply.
Right, there's no digital banking here.
Exactly. So imagine a single plane crash today not only being a horrific human tragedy, but instantly causing the modern banking system to collapse because it was carrying the entire physical liquidity of a major national bank.
It's hard to even wrap your head around.
It really is. When this ship sank, that gold vanished from the ledger, and it directly triggered the Panic of 1857, which was, one of the world's first true global financial crises.
And the economic devastation was really matched only by the human terror of the event itself. Because on September 9th, just 2 days out of Havana, Cuba, the Central America sailed directly into a Category 2 hurricane off the coast of the Carolinas.
Ugh, the descriptions in the historical records are just incredibly grim. You have winds howling at 105 miles per hour. This ship is violently pitching, and it starts taking on water.
And here is the fatal mechanical flaw of a 19th century steamship, right? The engines require burning coal to boil water.
Right.
So once the ocean water in the hull rises high enough to flood the fireboxes, the boilers go cold. The engines just completely fail.
Oh, man. So they just lose all power.
Exactly. And a sidewheel steamer without power in a hurricane is just a sitting duck. You lose the ability to keep the bow pointed into the waves, which is absolutely crucial for survival.
Wow.
The crew desperately attempted to raise a heavy canvas sail. They called it a storm spencer, just to get some directional control back. But the wind was so violent, it shredded that heavy canvas to tatters in a matter of minutes.
So you have this massive, powerless ship wallowing in the trough of hurricane-force waves. And the passengers and crew form a literal bucket brigade, like hundreds of people passing buckets of water by hand, fighting this completely mathematically impossible battle against the Atlantic Ocean.
Yeah. And the ship's commander was Captain William Lewis Herndon, who was this highly respected naval officer and explorer. And through sheer willpower and seamanship, he actually managed to hail passing ships during lulls in the storm.
That's incredible.
It is. He safely transferred over 150 people, primarily women and children, into lifeboats. But Herndon absolutely refused to save himself.
Yeah, he had actually told passengers earlier in the voyage, if she goes down, I go under her keel.
Just a completely different era of duty.
Truly. He dressed in his full naval uniform, took his position by the wheelhouse, and on the evening of September 12th, the Central America went down.
Yep.
425 people died.
And all of that gold, tons of it, went straight to the ocean floor. And the depth where it sank is the crucial factor here. It settled over a mile down.
Which, to put that in perspective, essentially froze the treasure in time. The depth acted as this impenetrable permanent vault.
Precisely. Because of the physical reality of the ocean at that depth. I mean, at 7,200 feet down, the water pressure is around 3,200 pounds per square inch.
Which is what? Exactly.
That is the equivalent of having a fully loaded cement truck parked on every single square inch of your body.
Oh my God.
Right. So for the next 130 years, no human technology could even conceptualize reaching it, let alone recovering it.
So that brings us out of the 19th century and into the 1980s, because to break into a vault that dangerous, you don't need a pirate. You need an obsessive, brilliant engineer.
Enter Tommy Thompson.
Exactly. Thompson was a marine engineer from Ohio who just became entirely fixated on the Central America, and he managed to convince 161 different investors to give him $12.7 million to form the Columbus America Discovery Group.
Yeah, and they purchased a 1958 Canadian icebreaker named the A.T. Cameron, rechristened it the RV Arctic Discoverer, and began this massive retrofitting process.
Right.
They integrated state-of-the-art GPS, which was highly experimental for civilian use at the time, and they built a custom 12,000-pound submersible robot they named Nemo.
See, it is so easy to picture Tommy Thompson as this, modern-day Indiana Jones standing on the deck of a ship with a weathered treasure map pointing at the horizon. But looking at the sources, this wasn't an adventure story. This was a massive, highly calculated data project.
Oh, completely.
Because you don't just stumble upon a wooden shipwreck in 1 million square miles of ocean.
Right. What's fascinating here is the massive gap between the media myth and the scientific reality. I mean, Gary Kinder's 1998 book, Ship of Gold in the Deep Blue Sea, was a massive bestseller.
Yeah, people loved it.
But it painted Thompson as this solitary genius who willed this treasure to the surface through sheer intuition. And we have a source from Bob Evans, who was the actual chief scientist and historian on that expedition, and he completely dismantles that lone wolf narrative.
Evans makes it clear that finding the ship was an exercise in pure mathematics, right?
Yes. Evans points out that the search was actually driven by Dr. Larry Stone, who was a leading expert in search theory. Dr. Stone used Bayesian probability algorithms.
Okay, wait. Bayesian algorithms.
Yeah, so instead of just mowing the lawn and looking at empty ocean, Bayesian search works almost like a high-stakes game of Battleship combined with statistics.
Okay, so how does that actually work in practice? Like out on the water?
Well, you start with a grid of the ocean and assign probabilities to each square based on historical accounts of where the ship was last seen. Every time your sonar scans a square and finds nothing, the math automatically updates the odds for all the other squares.
Oh, wow. So it learns as it goes.
Exactly. Dr. Stone ran 10,000 of these simulated experiments to create a heat map of the ocean floor.
See, that makes so much more sense. It wasn't just luck, it was a rigorous collaboration of mathematicians and engineers. And Evans also uses his insider perspective to correct some pretty persistent media myths.
He really does.
Because you constantly see articles claiming the ship was 8,000 feet down and they pulled up 3 tons of gold.
Right, and Evans corrects the record on both counts. The wreck was located at approximately 7,200 feet deep, and the recovery yielded about 2.3 tons of gold, not 3.
I mean, 2.3 tons still absolutely makes it the greatest lost treasure in U.S. history, but yeah, Evans insists on scientific accuracy.
Exactly.
2.3 tons of gold. There is this incredible moment in 1988 when they finally locate the wreck. Thompson is sitting in the control room, looking at the camera feeds transmitted from the Nemo robot a mile and a half below, and he describes the ocean floor as being carpeted with gold, like a garden.
And you have to appreciate the engineering miracle of Nemo. It had to survive that crushing pressure, the cement trucks, remember?
Right.
But it also had to be delicate enough to pick up a single 130-year-old gold coin without crushing it.
That's insane.
They used early telepresence and force feedback manipulator arms. It was a monumental triumph. They basically proved to the world that deep ocean recovery was viable.
But, and here's the turn, finding the gold was not the end of the story. In fact, pulling it out of the water was the moment the nightmare actually began.
Oh, yeah.
Because the second you announce to the world that you've found a mountain of gold, a whole lot of people suddenly remember that it belongs to them.
The legal mechanism here is admiralty law. So the moment the discovery went public, 39 different insurance companies filed lawsuits against Thompson's team.
39.
Under maritime law, if an insurance company paid out a claim on a lost cargo in 1857, and they still have the receipt, they retain the salvage rights to that cargo in 1988. It's not just finders keepers.
So instead of popping champagne on the deck of their ship, Thompson and his team get dragged into federal court for nearly a decade.
It was a brutal legal war of attrition. But finally, in 1996, a judge ruled largely in favor of the discovery team. The court awarded Thompson's group 92% of the treasure, with the remaining 8% allocated to the investors who had bankrolled the expedition.
Okay, so they win the war. In the year 2000, Thompson takes a massive portion of the treasure-like 532 gold bars and thousands of coins and sells them to the California Gold Marketing Group for $50 million.
Right.
$50 million. You would assume the 161 investors who made this whole thing possible are finally going to get their massive payout.
But they didn't.
No.
Despite that $50 million sale, the 161 original investors and the crew members who actually spent years out on the freezing ocean building and operating the robots saw absolutely zero return on their investments.
Here's where it gets really interesting, and by interesting I mean deeply infuriating. Imagine you are one of those 161 investors. It is like organizing a massive group lottery pool at your office, right? You all chip in your life savings, the ticket wins the $50 million jackpot, and then the guy holding the physical ticket suddenly refuses to answer his phone while you slowly realize he has cashed the ticket entirely by himself.
It is a stunning betrayal. And again, Bob Evans provides the crucial psychological insight into why Tommy Thompson did this.
Because it doesn't make logical sense at first.
No, but Evans observed that Thompson was an undisputed genius when it came to engineering and solving physical problems in the deep ocean. But that exact mindset made him manifestly unequal to the task of business management.
Wait, how does being a good engineer make you a bad CEO?
Well, think about it. Deep-sea engineering requires absolute hyper-paranoid control. If you make one miscalculation, the pressure crushes your robot and you lose millions. You have to control every single variable.
Right.
But in a boardroom with 161 investors asking questions, that hyper-control translates into a toxic culture of extreme secrecy. When the legal and financial pressures mounted, Thompson couldn't handle the variables. He basically froze.
He just shut down.
Yeah, he kept the inventory secret, he kept the money hidden, and he completely alienated the people who trusted him.
And that paranoia just continued to spiral out of control. By 2005 and 2006, the cheated investors and the crew members finally hit their breaking point and sued Thompson.
Right, they had had enough.
For years, he played legal games, delaying and dodging. And finally, in 2012, a federal judge ordered Thompson to physically appear in court to account for the money and a specific batch of missing gold.
And Thompson simply did not show up.
Just ghosted a federal judge?
His lawyers stood up in the courtroom and bizarrely claimed that his client was at sea with no expected return date.
Hold on. A guy with zero criminal background just vanishes into thin air. How does a marine engineer even know how to go off the grid effectively enough to dodge the federal government?
He literally studied it. The visionary scientist actively transformed himself into a fugitive. He went on the run with his girlfriend, Alice Antikyre, and for over 2 years, the U.S. Marshals could not find them.
That is crazy. And in 2015, they finally tracked the couple down, and they are not living on some glamorous mega yacht in the Mediterranean. The Marshals raid a mid-range $200 a night hotel room in Boca Raton, Florida.
Not exactly the high life.
No. Thompson and Antikyre are living under fake names, paying for absolutely everything in cash. When the authorities search the room, they find over $425,000 hidden in cash.
And the details of his life on the run are just bleak. Authorities had previously searched a mansion that Thompson had rented and hastily abandoned in Vero Beach.
What did they find there?
Inside, they found the physical evidence of his paranoia. I mean, empty coin tubes scattered on the floor, bank wraps for $10,000 stacks of cash, and disposable cell phones everywhere.
And the most incredible detail from that mansion, they found a book lying around titled How to Live Your Life Invisible. And one of the pages was dog-eared, the chapter heading, Live Your Life on a Cash-Only Basis.
He was using a literal guidebook on how to hide. I mean, the transition from a celebrated pioneer of oceanography to a man hiding in a Florida hotel room with a duffel bag of cash is just a profound psychological collapse.
Just think about the readers of Gary Kinder's 1998 book for a second. That book portrayed Thompson as a flawless American hero. Imagine finishing that book, feeling totally inspired by this triumph of science, and then Googling the hero's name only to discover his mugshot from a Florida hotel raid.
It is a massive reality check. But, the capture in 2015 did not bring the closure the investors wanted. When Thompson was finally dragged in front of a judge, he was specifically ordered to reveal the location of 500 missing gold coins.
These were not standard coins either. These were special commemoratives that had been struck using gold melted down from the shipwreck's original Kellogg and Humbert ingots. They were incredibly rare and valued at millions of dollars. Where did Thompson tell the judge they were?
He told the court he had turned them over to a trust in Belize. But when the judge pressed him for the exact details, like the account numbers or how to access this trust, Thompson suddenly claimed to suffer from a rare form of short-term memory loss.
Oh, come on.
He looked at the judge and said he just couldn't remember.
I'm sure the federal judge was very understanding about that.
The judge was furious. Thompson was held in civil contempt of court and fined $1,000 a day until he magically remembered where the coins were. Now, we need to explain the legal mechanism of civil contempt because it is very different from a criminal sentence.
Right, because normally you can't just throw someone in a cell indefinitely without a criminal trial, can you?
Exactly. In criminal court, you are punished for a crime with a set sentence. But civil contempt is coercive, not punitive. The logic is that you possess the keys to your own freedom.
Meaning he could leave whenever he wanted.
Yes, you can walk out of the jail the exact second you decide to comply with the judge's order. However, federal law generally limits jail time for civil contempt to 18 months.
Because eventually it stops being coercive.
Right. The legal theory is that if 18 months in a cell doesn't force you to talk, nothing ever will. And the incarceration loses its coercive power and becomes illegally punitive.
But Thompson stayed in much longer than 18 months.
He did. Because the stakes were so high, and because he clearly knew where the millions of dollars were hidden, the appeals courts repeatedly upheld his indefinite detention. He sat in a federal prison cell year after year.
Which brings us to the breaking news from our 2026 sources. In March 2026, Tommy Thompson, now 73 years old, was finally released from prison.
Yeah, after more than a decade behind bars, a judge finally ruled that his continued incarceration had officially lost its coercive effect. The court essentially conceded that if 10 years in a cage hadn't restored his memory, nothing would.
Right, sitting in a cell was never going to make him talk.
Exactly.
So he walks free. But his life is completely destroyed. He remains under strict court supervision. He owes over $3.3 million in accumulated daily fines. And the civil lawsuits from the 161 defrauded investors are still actively pending against him.
Meanwhile, the irony is that Thompson sacrificed his life, his reputation, and his freedom over a fraction of the gold.
Wait, what do you mean a fraction?
Well, according to the court-appointed receiver who took over the project after Thompson fled, that incredible, massive expedition in the 1980s only excavated about 5% of the wreck site.
Wait, 5%? You are telling me 95% of this legendary treasure ship was just sitting down there in the dark while Thompson was reading books on how to be invisible in a Florida hotel?
That is the reality. So in 2014, the court-appointed receiver contracted a new salvage company, Odyssey Marine Exploration, to go back down to the 7,200-foot mark. And they had massive success.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, using modern robotics during a 5-month expedition, Odyssey recovered over 15,500 more gold and silver coins, 45 gold bars, and hundreds of historical artifacts.
But they didn't use Thompson's grand ship, the Arctic Discoverer, to do it. What happened to the ship that made the greatest discovery in maritime history?
The fate of the RV Arctic Discoverer is probably the most depressing footnote to this entire saga. After Thompson went on the run, the ship was seamed by U.S. Marshals to help pay down his massive debts. A ship that cost millions to retrofit, that revolutionized deep-sea exploration, was sold at auction for a mere $50,000.
$50,000.
Yeah.
That is less than the price of a decent pickup truck.
And the buyer essentially stripped it for scrap metal. Historic pieces of the ship, the navigational lights, the internal speaking tubes, even the brass ship's bell were auctioned off piecemeal on eBay.
That's just sad.
The gutted, empty hull was left abandoned at a dock in Florida, slated to eventually be sunk as an artificial reef. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the contrast is just staggering. You have a man who spent his entire life mastering the immense, crushing physical pressure of the deep ocean.
Right.
He literally built robots that could survive thousands of pounds of pressure per square inch. But in the end, it was the intangible pressure of the business and legal world that completely crushed him. The engineering problems were solvable with math and materials. The human problems, greed, transparency, and trust, were completely insurmountable.
So what does this all mean? We have followed an incredible arc today. We went from the wild optimism of the California gold rush through the horrific terror of a hurricane in 1857 to the absolute mathematical and engineering triumph of Bayesian search and deep-sea robotics in the 1980s.
It's a huge journey.
It is. And where does it end? In a modern-day federal prison cell and a stripped, abandoned ship rotting at a dock. It is a stark reminder that while human technology can conquer the deepest, darkest, most dangerous parts of the physical world, we clearly still haven't found an algorithm to cure human greed.
Beautifully said. The treasure of the Central America acted as a massive amplifier. It amplified the tragedy of the sinking, it amplified the brilliance of the scientific discovery, and finally, it amplified the deepest psychological flaws of the people who brought it to the surface.
Which leaves you with a final thought to mull over today. Think about that 95% of the SS Central America that remained unexplored for decades, and the countless other shipwrecks still sitting in the freezing dark of the ocean right now. We always assume that recovering lost history is this noble triumph. We think of museums and preservation. But when you consider the endless lawsuits, the bitter betrayals, the destruction of a historic research vessel, and the decade a brilliant man spent locked in a cage over a few hundred gold coins,
It really makes you wonder.
is it possible that these treasures are actually safer and their history more perfectly preserved when they're left completely alone at the bottom of the sea?
It forces you to question the true cost of dragging the past into the present.
It really does. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.